All right, here we go. Salute to NBA Nation on this Wednesday afternoon, man. Another edition of the NBA Report. We are just about 6 days away from the start of the NBA season, coming fast. The preseason has been going strong, and today we want to talk about one of our teams to watch on our radar. One of the teams on our radar, man, that is OKC Thunder, and we're going to talk about that team with the host, one of the hosts of the Down to Dunk podcast and OKC Thunder podcast, hosted by The Athletic, and that is Alex Spears. And we got CP the Franchise, Alex Shataros on the ones and twos as well, man. So lock in, hit that like button, hit the share button, and subscribe to the channel. All right. All right, we got two Alexes here, man. So Al, I'm going to refer to you as Al, as I usually do, but for Alex Spears, how you doing, man? Welcome to the NBA Report.
Doing great. Thank you for inviting me. Always happy to talk Thunder.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And as we get into this Thunder team, they were trying to climb into the playoffs last year, made a valiant effort, and just missed out. Let's start with the offseason. How did you feel like their offseason went?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty thrilled about the draft. At some point last year, we kind of had to give up our Wemby hope, this dream of the Wemby-Chet pairing that would have destroyed the league for the next decade. We eventually had to give up, and that was fine because the team was doing so well. But, landing in that spot in the draft, I just didn't know who they were going to go after. And moving up and getting Cason Wallace, who was a guard I really liked, and the only reason I wasn't really eyeing in on him is just because this team has so many guards.
Yeah.
And so I was, worried with, SGA, with J-Dub, with Giddey, like how are they going to find minutes for this guy? And with Dort. But learning more about him, I just think he's going to be perfect for this team. And who knows if he's like a long-term Dort replacement, but he has some of those same qualities as Dort while also bringing a lot more offensively because he actually, ran as a point guard at Kentucky. So he has a little bit more passing chops. We believe in his shot a little bit more. So that was kind of the main thing from the offseason for us, getting Cason Wallace. And then just seeing Chet healthy again, both in Summer League and then in these preseason games. I mean, the amount of gaps he fills on this roster it can't be overstated. He does so much that this team just has not had these past couple of years, whether it's rim protection, someone who's efficient around the basket, having another shooter who can space the floor. He checks so many boxes for this team. And we've seen in this preseason that the team just is playing completely different. Like they look good from start to finish. Whereas last year you'd have these pockets of time where either due to a lack of shooting or due to a lack of presence down low, they'd either be getting beat up on the glass or the offense would just get really stagnant. And at least right now it's preseason, so we don't know, but it feels like they've solved some of those issues just by the presence of Chet.
Yeah, you could
argue. Telling me
you could argue that was the biggest acquisition of the Thunder, man. It's
it's huge.
A healthy Chet back.
It's hard to watch this preseason now and not think about last season and be like, damn, like if they were able to win 40 games without Chet, like how much better would they have been if he had just been healthy for that season?
Yeah.
And I know like the West is better, so like I can't have crazy expectations because I do think a lot of the teams around us are going to be better as well. But yeah, man, he's completely changed the makeup of this team.
It's just funny to think that just to think that Chet's back and you had Poku, the guy who's, I mean, even just a few years ago through the draft, that Poku was supposed to be this next unicorn. What are your thoughts on Poku before we go further into this?
Oh, man. First of all, thank you for asking about Poku so early in the podcast. He deserves it. Poku, back when he was drafted, you look at the roster back then, it was basically Shea and Dort, and we were kind of waiting for like, who's going to be like the young blue chip prospect that Presti drafts. And we kind of put all our hope into the Poku basket initially because that first draft, that was after the CP3 year. So we didn't have a great pick. They ended up moving up to 17 and grabbed Poku. But he was like such a mystery man, theoretically could do everything that was like, yeah, let's just jump on board. We have no other young guys that we're like super excited about other than SGA and Dort. And his first like 2 months in the league were some of the greatest entertainment I've ever seen on a basketball court, like genuinely funny. He was so bad. He was not an NBA player at all. Over the past 2 years, he has gradually turned into what I think could be a rotation player in the league. Like if you look at what he did last year, he really started to put some things together, and he shares all of those traits that Presti seems to be looking for, which is size for position, ability to handle, and ability to pass. He has that. He just struggles with trying to like play basketball in a normal way sometimes. It was really a bummer this summer when he got hurt, both missing Summer League, which I don't know if he would have played that anyways, but now missing the preseason with this ankle injury. I do think, however, that if he gets back, like people may have already written him off, he will get playing time because I don't know if you guys heard, but like Kenrich Williams is out. J. Will is out with a hamstring. Those were going to be our two main backup fives behind Chet. And so those guys are going to be out the start of the season. If Poku can somehow get back, he will get another opportunity. Now, this may be his last opportunity if he can't put it together this season. But I do think he has one last run in him before they cut bait.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for a team like the Thunder that finished, at the midway point in terms of defensive rating, getting Chet back is going to be super critical. How do you feel like they would address their, outside of Poku? How do you feel like they would address their front court depth there if those two major pieces in Kenrick and Jalen are out for an extended amount of time?
Yeah. So what we saw last night, they played the Bucks, and the first guy off the bench was Ousmane Dieng. So he was the pick after J-Dub in that draft. I think he was picked like 11. Or actually, he went before J-Dub. He was pick 11. Dieng is one of these. He's the youngest player on the team, even with Case in there. He grew an inch this summer, so apparently he's 6'11" now. However, when you watch him play, he doesn't really play like a big. He plays like a 6'11" wing, and I actually really like him more on the perimeter. Like when he's guarding guards and wings, I'm super impressed. When he's put in a position where he has to guard bigs around the rim, it's not as good because he's not a super physical guy.
Right.
And I feel like he uses his length a lot better on the perimeter, but he was their sixth man last night. And I think in a lot of matchups, like last night when they brought him in, Robin Lopez was the center. So it's like, are we really worried about Robin Lopez beating up on Ousmane Dieng? Not really. And if they want to feed Robin Lopez the whole game, whatever. I do think there are going to be matchups like against Cleveland, for instance, where you might not be able to get away with playing Ousmane Dieng as one of your bigs. But frankly, at this point, they don't have a ton of options if Kenrich and J. Will are out. So I think Dieng is going to get some run. I also think our two-way Olivier Sarr, who's the brother of Alex Sarr, who's going to be like a top 5 pick in this upcoming draft, I think he's going to get some run. The bigger point, though, is like those injuries to Kenrich and J. Will are significant because when this team was successful defensively playing small last year, it was with Kenrich at the 5. We can tell ourselves that like, oh, this team trained themselves to play small, not having Chet, they had to figure things out. And that's true to some extent, but the lineups that actually were successful defensively were the ones with Kenrich at the 5. So I don't think you can just sub in like, oh, let's just play J-Dub at the 5 or let's play Dieng at the 5 and you're going to get the same results. The difference this year is that offensively, you're going to have 35 minutes of Chet out there most likely, as long as he stays healthy. So that will be mitigated a little bit. But yeah, I am slightly worried about their backup big minutes right now.
And once again, we're talking to Alex Spears, who covers the Thunder on the Down to Dunk podcast, hosted by The Athletic. CP the Franchise, Alex Rotaro's here. The NBA Report. So to everybody in the chat, hit that like button, the share button, and subscribe to the channel. Now, Alex, a lot of people like this OKC core. There's a lot to like, obviously, starting with SGA. Josh Giddey certainly taking on Storm. Jalen Williams making a name for himself. Did you hear the comment? I'm going to play the comment from ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski on this Thunder squad, and I want to get you. I want to get your reaction to it, man. Here's Woj on what he likes about these guys. Here's Woj.
I think team-wise, Oklahoma City, I think there are 4 potential All-Stars in that lineup down the road, and maybe Holmgren's a potential MVP candidate, certainly.
Maybe Holmgren's an MVP candidate. I mean, he hasn't even played a game, and Woj is putting him.
Yeah. I mean, I might have gone with SGA, who was like top 5 in MVP voting, but okay, whatever.
Right.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, that was weird because for the last 2 years, the Thunder, because of the way they've gone about their business, have drawn a lot of ire from national media. Famously, one guy who I think is on SiriusXM. He called us the black eye of the league, and we kind of warned that. as as something to be proud of. So we've had this like 180 this offseason where now all of a sudden everyone loves the Thunder. I mean, what Woj just said would be insane for like if you said that on Down to Dunk, we would be like, wow, that's a really spicy take. That is like the most homer take we have heard. So it's very weird to hear national media acting this homerish about the team. I think it's fine to say that, hey, this is a young, exciting team. They should expect to be in the playoffs. Like that should be a goal for them. But I don't think you have to go too much farther than that. You don't have to start blowing this out into something bigger than it might be. I mean, this team still has to prove a lot.
Yeah.
Like they've never made the playoffs. Like, why don't we start there? Like, let them prove to us that they can withstand an entire 82-game season, stay healthy, make it to the playoffs, and then you can give them their flowers. But the idea that, we're all going to blow smoke up their ass right now, like, I know a lot of Thunder fans like that because it's nice for a change to hear media talking about your team in a positive way. But on the flip side, it does feel like they're setting us up for, if this is a season's of disappointment, are those SGA trade rumors going to just stir back up and people are going to be talking about that?
Send them to New York like they send everybody
exactly.
on paper. Yeah.
So it's nice, but I see what they're doing. I know what the ulterior motives of this are. Yeah.
Of course. Well, as Knicks fans, we all know this way too well. Even being a Jets fan myself, I know when we made it to back-to-back AFC championships, they're like, the Jets will make it to the Super Bowl. What happens? We go 8-8 that year. The Giants make it to the Super Bowl, and then the Jets have been trash ever since. So it's just a setup for failure. But with that in mind, though, right? Like, and I think the big thing why you have people like ESPN and other outlets that are just so high on OKC Thunder is because a very young core. Everyone likes the flashy new young thing, and the OKC Thunder are a very young squad. I mean, they were even voted They were voted most improved. They're voted most promising young core. And now when you you see SGA, Chet, even Lou Dort, you throw in there, you got Jalen Williams and Jalen Williams, right? You got Josh Giddey as well. Like, I could see why, because these guys have flashed a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So with all of that said, I got to pivot to Sam Presti though. So like with Presti, do you think he's done a good job after losing 3 MVP caliber candidates and saying now we're on this right track of rebuilding? Because as you noted, for such a long time, you guys have you haven't been competitive. I mean, you were sitting SGA for many games over the past few seasons just because this team was looking to stay in the draft, get more talent. And now you're in this position where it's like, you guys actually could make the playoffs.
Yeah, so I think that some of the criticisms of Presti would have held a lot more weight if last year hadn't have happened. Because now that we saw what happened last year with them making the play-in, like, all of a sudden you look back at the time that they were actually bad, and it was a total of 16 months. And the reason that happened was because of the COVID year and the way it got screwed up. They were actually only a bad team for 16 months. And you look at some of these other teams like the Pistons, who have lost 80 games, or they've won 80 games combined over the last 4 seasons. Like, OKC has kind of, in my opinion, proved that their rebuild has worked. It doesn't mean that they're going to go on and be a contender every year, but they've already shown way more than the teams that were around them, mainly thinking about Houston and Detroit, because those were kind of our tank buddies during these last couple seasons. So I think with Presti, the one thing that may be hard for other people to understand is that, like, our best free agent signing in free agent history was probably Isaiah Joe from last year. Number 2 on that list, maybe Anthony Morrow. Like, guys are not coming to OKC.
Yeah.
Those are legitimately, dude, when Markieff Morris signed with us as a buyout on those like Russ PG teams, we were like, oh my gosh, we got Markieff Morris. This is huge. Like, he knows that in that market, free agency just really isn't an option. It's not. The only way we're going to get better is to the draft and through trades. And so what he's been doing is replenishing the roster with all these young guys that we have team control over, and then restocking our asset base, which had kind of gotten bad towards the end because they had used up a lot of their picks, kind of chasing it in 2016, trading for like Enes Kanter, trading for Dion Waiters. So he rebuilt that asset base to a point where now he theoretically could trump any offer for any player just based on picks alone, not to mention like the young players he could throw in. So I think for the market he's in, he's done nearly a perfect job. And for this to only have taken 2 years before they're back in the play-in conversation, I think is a huge success. But with all that said, like, you still have to make the next step. Like, we're not going to celebrate a play-in appearance, you know? Like, this is about making the playoffs. The unfortunate part for Oklahoma City fans is we've been spoiled. Like, we had that initial bad season when they first showed up. That was Russ's rookie season. The next year, they won 50 games. Like, this team hasn't been bad. We had that initial honeymoon period where we were cool with the team being bad, and then they were immediately winning 50 games. Kobe's coming to Oklahoma City, you know, like in a playoff series. So I think fans in this market haven't really had to taste what it's like to be bad for consecutive years. And so Presti did an amazing job in terms of shrinking that period as small as he could. I mean, one of the things that I think was brilliant, which wasn't really his doing, was that because that happened during the pandemic, that first tank season, there was no one in the stands. They were the only team that never allowed fans back into the arena, and they just said it was COVID. But on the other hand, like, they kept all those people from seeing some of the worst basketball I've watched as a basketball fan. So he really played this perfect with the fan base. The goal now, get to the playoffs and get the fans back, because I do think that has been a disappointment these last 2 years, is the attendance has slowly dwindled, and that has to come back. That's something that has bothered me personally, because OKC fans for so long were seen as this really good fan base.
Some of the best.
With all those teams with Katie and Russ, like in the playoffs, always super loud. And I've been disappointed even last year when the team was good. I mean, we were 40 wins with how the fans shut up. So I'm hoping that comes back to full strength this season.
I have to ask just one follow-up question, because CP and I were Knicks fans. Because of the big fan base, there's always polarizing ideas on how to rebuild the team and move forward. And with Presti's way of just collecting so many draft assets and continuously being in the draft, do you believe that to be the right way to rebuild a team, or do you think there's just many other ways to like rebuild a team like the Knicks are doing right now?
I absolutely think there's a ton of ways to build a team, but for me, it comes more down to the context. Like, what market are you in? What avenues are available for you? There absolutely were Thunder fans after the CP3 season who were like, why don't we just run it back? Like, let's just bring the gang back together. I mean, they ended up being, I think, the fourth or fifth seed that season, went to 7 games against the Rockets. It's like, we've got a playoff team. Like, why not just push this forward? What those people aren't willing to admit is that there was always a deal with CP3 and Presti that he was going to trade him to somewhere he wanted to go after that season. The second that season ended, in the bubble, CP3 put out a statement, or he put out like a video thanking the OKC fans. Like, he already knew it was over. And so once CP3's gone, now it's like, okay, which of those trades shouldn't Presti have made? Should he not moved on from Dennis Schroeder? Should he not moved on from Kelly Oubre or Ricky Rubio? Like, none of the players that he could have potentially gotten really made sense for where the team was at. They were obviously going to have to get younger. And so I think for that specific context, what he did absolutely made sense. But in another market, one, like, the fan base might not be willing to stomach that. I think it can be hard for some fan bases who are used to success, or used to at least being relevant, to just be irrelevant for a couple seasons. But I think the timing of everything just worked out. It was kind of like a perfect storm for Presti, where he could go all the way in that direction and build it back up really quickly.
Yeah, and I think, once again, we're talking to Alex Spears, who covers the OKC Thunder on the Down to Dunk podcast, hosted by The Athletic. CP and Alex, the NBA Report, live and direct. Hit that like button, the share button, and subscribe to the channel. And what I like about this team, and also why I see a lot of the hype starting to build around them, is because they're in a unique situation in that, just as you said, you kind of have those perennial lottery teams like the Detroits. Orlando's kind of been in that situation. Minnesota's had their time there. Houston is there now, where they draft a young player after young player after young player, but they're not really moving the needle for the organization. Right. And with the Thunder, I think that's what you have now. Yes, SGA, he's been around. He's kind of the guy, but you look around, every other player that is homegrown is helping push that needle. It's Josh Giddey, it's Jalen Williams, it's Chet when he gets into his groove, and it's not the big ticket free agent yet, or it's not that veteran that's blocking a young player from grooming. I mean, these are all homegrown talents that's pushing this team to try to get into the top 8 in the West. And so that's why I think they're in a unique spot. The question is, from your perspective, do you believe that this organization is going to continue to push the developmental track with the young core, or do you see with Presti always keeping that war chest full that he will eventually push the chips into the middle and get that big ticket item?
Yeah, I mean, if he does do that, it's not going to happen soon. I mean, he's been asked this question at every press conference, like every preseason press conference, every postseason press conference, and he's always made a point of saying, we don't know what we have yet, which is especially true going into this season where these guys just haven't even played with Chet yet. And so how can you make a decision about who you want to trade potentially one of these young players plus a lot of picks for until you see how it works? I mean, one of the big differences with this rebuild as opposed to his first rebuild is that, you know, he nailed those first couple of picks. KD, Russ, Harden. He drafted like 3 supernova players. And so the rest of his reign during that first rebuild was all about trying to figure out guys who could play with Russ, who could play with KD and fit around just like these larger than life players. That's kind of different now because even though we have a first team All-NBA player like Shea does not play in the way that KD and Russ did. It's much easier to fit other pieces around him. And so as a result, Presti has created this roster of all these guys who are really versatile. They can all pass, they can all dribble, they can mostly all shoot. Giddey, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But I think the way he's building this team is so different from the way he built it the first time with KD and Russ. And I think that's going to help them a lot moving forward. So in terms of them adding a piece, I do think that'll happen eventually. But I think people may be disappointed when that trade eventually comes through because I have a feeling it's going to be more for a high-end role player than it is for them going out and trading for Karl Anthony Towns or like a name like that. The other factor in this is that if we really do like all these players, and depending on which Thunder fan you talk to, it's like, well, yeah, obviously Shea's like a definite keeper, like J-Dub's a definite keeper, Chet's a definite keeper. If you're just paying those 3 guys, forget Giddey for a second, like you're going to be near the tax.
Yeah.
And I think this team is definitely going to be willing to go into the tax. They showed that with the Russ KD teams. They were majorly into the tax once they traded for Melo. I mean, they have paid more in tax than a majority of NBA teams. They always get this reputation for being a cheap franchise. Go look at the teams that have actually paid luxury tax. Go look at what Denver's done. Denver doesn't pay the tax. Like OKC has paid way more in tax than Denver. But anyways, my point is going back, like if you trade for a Karl Anthony Towns right now, all of a sudden you severely limit your future flexibility because they're in a position right now for at least the next 2 years, they're going to have a lot of wiggle room where they could potentially move in a guy, transfer a guy out, trade for a guy, do whatever they want to do. As soon as you make that big trade, you're done in some respects. Like you're locked into that. If you're trading for Karl Anthony Towns making $60 million a year or whatever, like that completely changes the complexion of your roster. So it has to be a perfect fit. It can't just be the next star that comes on the market. It has to be a perfect fit. So I'm open to the idea of that happening, but it all depends on who the guy is. Like there are Thunder fans who literally anytime someone becomes available, they're like, we got to get Drew Holiday. That was like the big name like a month ago. Like Drew Holiday is a great fit. Why is a small market team trading for a 33-year-old on an expiring contract when we already know that the best free agent in our history is Isaiah Joe? Like Presti's never going to trade for Pascal Siakam. He's on an expiring deal. He's never going to trade for OG Anunoby. He's on an expiring deal. He's only going to make trades where he can get a guy in and lock him in. The only reason he made that Paul George trade was because, who was on an expiring contract, is because by that point they had reached the end of the road. Like there was really no going further. Once you lose KD and now you just have Russ, you kind of have to make an all-in move. Yeah. They don't need to make an all-in move right now. And so that's why I think it might take a little bit longer to see that type of trade.
That's a good point.
You keep saying Karl Anthony Towns. Is that somebody the OKC Thunder fan base wants? Or like, is that just, I just want to know.
I mean, there's a popular idea that like Chet can't be a long-term center and you have to get someone bigger next to him. Not that like Karl Anthony Towns, I mean, he's big, but he's not necessarily like some rim protector. But I think that Thunder fans see that and they, hear the whisperings, the Towns Gobert pairing isn't going to work. Maybe he's the next star that's available. And they get excited because they see it as an easy fit. Like you slot him into the power forward position, and it makes sense. And in some respects, it does make sense. I mean, I think Towns would be very good on the Thunder, but given the contract length and the contract amount, I think that's where you get into the questions about, do we really want to limit our flexibility for Towns? Like, is he really the perfect fit?
No, and that makes a lot of sense, especially for, a small market team like OKC, right? It's not like the Lakers where you get somebody like Russell Westbrook on that contract and you can just easily flip them because you're the Lakers. This is OKC, as you talked about earlier in the show, where it's tough, one, to get players through free agency, and two, you have to be strategic with how you're rebuilding the team, especially for Presti, who's done it through the draft. It just makes sense why you just don't choose any star, because walking into someone like Karl-Anthony Towns without any guarantee that you're going to be competing for a championship, that's a tall order. That's a tall order for a team that's been well rebuilt.
And I think the other point to make is that, when it comes to a small market team, you really have to decide, are you interested in legitimately trying to be a contender, or do you just want to be a good team? Because if the goal was just to be a good team, like Presti has the assets right now where he could trade for enough pieces to make this team a 45 to 50 win team every season for the next couple seasons. The question is, do you want to do that, or do you want to try to actually win a championship? Because if you look at these small market teams that have actually won championships, one, it's like a nothing list. It's basically the Spurs. And it requires like an all-time great player, like a player you would put in the top 10. So unless you think that Shea can be a top 10 player of all time, the chances of them winning a championship are very small, and it's likely going to take something really out of the box to make work. And I think that's why he's gone about this rebuild so much differently than the KD Russ. When you have someone like KD, who you can pretty confidently feel, even like a few years into his career, like this is an all-time player. He could be a top 10 player of all time. That makes your rebuild a lot more simpler in some ways, because you have that guy. Again, if you believe that Shea could be that guy, well, then, maybe we should like adjust our rebuilding. But if you think Shea is just going to be like maybe a top 100 player of all time, which is still incredible, it's likely going to take a really specific scenario for them to actually win a championship. And so I think that's why they're being so patient, because as soon as you make that move, like your chance of making that move is kind of done. Your flexibility dries up. So they want to see what they have first and then reassess.
That's gotta be so difficult, man. Just because of like time, like the time frames of contracts and everything, age for each player. I mean, yes, it's a very young team, but still, like being that patient to wait for the right opportunity, like that alone is just so finite because of the players you got to think about playing. Like you talked about it. You talked about it earlier in the show, right? If you're going to start paying and go over the cap, and you think Presti's going to do it, there's still only so much money you can go over that, go into the luxury tax, and still be patient enough to wait for that right player. Do you just so for that, like, how do you think Presti's going to navigate that?
I think the actual point of these picks is that he knows he's not going to be able to pay everyone, but the people he's not going to be able to pay are not like the core guys. It's going to be the guys around the periphery of this team. Someone like Isaiah Joe, who came in, is making a couple $1 million. If he shoots over 40% from three again, he's going to get a good deal next summer. And they might not keep him because they feel like we can go get that guy again with all these assets. We can go find an Isaiah Joe somewhere else. Whereas I don't think they feel like, we can just replace SGA. We can just replace Chet or J-Dub. I think what their strategy is going to be is pay their main guys and then rotate in the other, complementary pieces using those picks, using those assets. So that, if Cason Wallace becomes an awesome player one day, but he's like your sixth man coming off the bench, like providing good defense, 3-and-D guy, maybe they aren't willing to pay him $20 million a year if someone else is, but they will try to find that guy another way. I don't think yet they're ready to move on from one of the core four, which I would include Giddey in that as well. I think they're going to give that at least another 2 seasons, because they have 2 seasons before Josh Giddey's next contract would even kick in. And then J-Dub and Chet are 3 years out. So they have time.
Yeah, they absolutely should be investing in those guys and give it some time. Now, this week, or just yesterday on Tuesday, Sam Presti came under fire in the acquisition of one Kevin Porter Jr. The Rockets traded Kevin Porter Jr., who's come under fire. He was arrested and charged with a domestic violence charges. Now the Rockets traded him to the Thunder and 2 second-round picks. The Thunder sent the Rockets back Victor Oladipo, Jeremiah Robinson Earl. Some people on one side of the argument are saying, this is bad. You had Eric Kareen of The Athletic saying that this was a step back. How did you see it?
Yeah, it's one of those things where the likely ending to this KPJ, domestic abuse allegations was that he was going to be traded and he was going to be waived. That was always going to be the likely scenario. He was also always going to get paid because his contract had already been guaranteed for this year. My feeling was, okay, I'm fine. I understand that that's always going to be what's going to happen. I just didn't want my team to be on the other end of it. I understand somebody probably has to do it at the end of the day, because from what I understand, the NBA, the Houston Rockets couldn't actually waive him right now. They could trade him, but they could not waive him yet. So in that case, I'm fine that some team is probably going to do it and probably going to get picks for it. I just didn't want it to be my team, because there's an aspect of it where it feels like you're leveraging this awful situation to get a couple of seconds. And it's like, who cares at the end of the day about the seconds? I would have rather just waived Jerry and Victor Oladipo if that was always going to be the plan for those guys, rather than getting involved. Now, on the flip side, and this is what a lot of Thunder fans were arguing to me yesterday, was he's never going to put on a uniform. He's already waived. He's not associated anymore with this franchise. It's something you're going to forget about in a week. And that's probably true. But I still think in the moment, I just didn't like seeing his name in the same sentence as my favorite team's name, And so I understand if people aren't upset, and I respect that. But for at least one day, it just felt like I'd rather just not be associated with the situation at all.
Yeah.
Because we've seen, in the Miles Bridges case, the effect that's had on their fan base. I mean, I read a really good article yesterday on SB Nation about one of their fans who's just decided to stop following the team because he just hates the way the team has handled that situation, especially with these new allegations, still letting him practice with the team. I think that's totally understandable. I also think it's understandable if you're a Hornets fan, you're like, listen, that guy's not going to define my fandom. He's eventually going to be off this team. Whoever made those decisions is going to be off this team. I'm still going to be here with this team. I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to take as well. It's more that this is a league-wide issue where these teams just aren't good at handling domestic violence cases. They aren't good enough at making statements up front to their fan bases to at least acknowledge the awful position they're putting the fans in, having to talk about this and having to wonder, am I going to have to watch this guy for the rest of his career? I don't really want to associate with this guy. Yeah. I think this is a league-wide problem, and the Thunder did not have to get themselves involved at all. And while it's not like they got involved to a significant degree, it's not like this guy was actually ever on the team or playing for the team. I understood when Jake Fisher reported yesterday that the Rockets were having a really hard time making this deal. I understand why. I understand teams just saying, I don't want any part of this. Even if I got 2 seconds, I just don't want to be a part of it at all. And so that's kind of how I felt. And so I understood how those teams felt. Listen, it's going to blow over. He's never going to play for the team. But it was just one of those instances where it's like, we already have 20 seconds in the next 7 years.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Right.
Who cares? A 21st and 20 seconds, 2 more seconds. Who cares? Just waive the guys so that you just avoid this altogether. That was my feeling on it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I could definitely see both sides of the argument. I think for me, I try to make this separation between the moral side of things, aka would he actually be on the roster, on the team, right? Which is that's a definite no. That's why when a lot of Knicks fans would approach me what do you think about getting Miles Bridges? And I'm like, that's not really the direction that they want to go in. But then I also see the business side of things, and as you put it, the Rockets weren't able to waive him necessarily. So I just look at it as more of a paper transaction between the two teams. The OKC Thunder waived him already. I get where you're saying the 2 picks are kind of, meaningless. I don't know. For me, I just kind of looked at it as a paperwork exercise, not to belittle what he did by any stretch, But the idea that they were going to waive him and he was never going to step foot in OKC anyway, that's where I was like, okay, I'm okay with it just by being look, it's a business, right? Assets are being exchanged all the time. That's just kind of where I thought what I thought about that whole situation there.
Yeah, and I was on we did Down to Dunk this morning, and my friend Andrew brought up like the actual bad move that OKC would have done that would have been the cold calculating Presti move would be to keep his contract on the books so that they could have used it as salary ballast in a future trade. Like that, because that's a scenario where he's still not playing for the team. Like you don't necessarily have to give him a number or anything, but they could have kept his contract just purely as an asset to trade in a future deal. And he didn't do that. So like, I do appreciate that, because that would have been a scenario where like now we're still having to talk about him throughout this Thunder season when it's going to be a really fun season. I just don't want to be talking about Kevin Porter Jr.
True.
So yes, I'm glad they waived him. I'm glad that they waived him so strongly that it was in the original Woj tweet. Like to be clear from the jump in the trade announcement, it was like, who will be waived immediately? Like that's what I was expecting and hoping for. If this was ever going to come up. But yeah, it's going to blow over. I just wonder, I do think there's some fans are being a little naive thinking that like, oh, this is the last we're going to hear from KPJ. Because if you compare it to the Miles Bridges situation, we had way more evidence in that case in terms of visual evidence. We had the medical report. The idea that KPJ is definitely out of the league forever, I don't know if that's the case. Like the reason why guys get kicked out of this league is because they're not good enough. Like if Miles Bridges was a 10-point per game scorer, I think the Charlotte Hornets would have taken the noble stand of making sure he was not on their team anymore. But because he's a 20 per game scorer, all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, we'll give him $8 million. We'll see how this works out. So I'm not confident that we're not going to see KPJ again. And it's up to individual fans how that makes them feel if they're fans of the team that eventually does sign him.
Yeah, that's all true points. I think the last thing I just want to add is that you can tell that Presti, as you noted, Alex, like he didn't want any part of it, just like in the initial Woj tweet. But he also, like to your point, noted like, look, this is going to be a very fun season. Don't need to have somebody on this team that one isn't going to contribute, and two, just so if we're doing well, the next question is going to be, so is KPJ going to be playing at all for this time, right? Even if you keep that contract on the book. So good to know that he's not staying around for there. But getting back to more fun things for this team, I just have to know. And I'm really going to go with a hard pivot. The head coach, man. Never knew about this guy until he was hired. Yeah. What are your thoughts about him and his job for this team?
Yeah, he kind of came out of nowhere. He wasn't out of nowhere for the Thunder because he was the coach of our G League team for a couple seasons. So, like, obviously the franchise knew about him. But for fans of the team, like when we were going through the coach hiring process, I wouldn't say like he was the obvious choice. Like we were talking about a lot of other guys. He has been kind of incredible so far in both his interviews and what he showed on court. Now there's a huge jump to make from rebuilding team, even a play-in team, to like, how does this guy coach in the playoffs? And that's something we just don't know. Like we're going to have to wait and see, but he's basically checked every box that you would want as a fan so far. All the players talk really well about him. He seems to be on their side. Like he seems like a really good players coach. He's very good at empowering players. One of the unique aspects of the Thunder, so they, now with the 3 2-ways, you can have 18 guys on a roster. I promise you, he will play all 18 guys. He did it last year. He played all 17 guys. He will play every single person on this roster night to night. And we have a guy on our 2-way, Lindy Waters, who like most people don't have any idea who he is. He's been a 2-way now for us for the last 2 seasons. Like he will play more than Trey Mann this year if they end up keeping Trey Mann. He will play everyone on this roster. And I think that's part of why the players like him so much, because they know that even if their long-term future isn't with the Thunder, they're going to get to put something on tape in a way that other guys on 2-ways just aren't going to get to do against NBA competition. And so I think there's a lot of buy-in like across the board with him. And then tactically, he's been really good so far in terms of like crafting this kind of Swiss Army knife roster where any one of like Giddey, Shea, or J-Dub could theoretically run point for this team. And so to have all those guys on the court at the same time and figure out how that works, I think that's really tough. And I think that would be tough for some coaches. I think a lot of coaches would be tempted to run more of a heliocentric offense like Luka, where you just give the ball to Shea, space everyone out, let Shea, drive into the lane 50 times a game, which honestly he already does kind of do that. But Daigneault has done this thing where he'll have Lou Dort bring the ball up the court. He'll have Giddey bring up the ball up the court. He gives other teams so many different looks. And I think that's a really good sign because that's the type of roster that Presti's trying to build.
We're talking about Mark Daigneault as you just said for the last name. That's awesome.
Well, so where's your specialty, in the offensive side of the ball or defense?
I'd probably say defense because even when this team was, without Chet, without any big man of note, without any rim protection, even if you liked some of the bigs they had, there was a period of time, I think it was 2 years ago, before Shea went out, where they were like a top 11, top 10 defense, with guys like Darius Baisley and Lou Dort obviously is a good defender, but some of the other guys on the team, you looked at the roster and you're like, I have no idea how this team is top 10. And basically what their strategy was because we don't have a big, because we don't have any rim protection, we're packing the paint and then using our athleticism to close out really hard on shooters. And so they ended up just really mucking things up for other teams. And it was just a different look. And I think that's going to serve him well. Now that he gets to add in Chet, it's almost like this huge relief. It's like you can still go back to those small ball lineups and play that way. But now you actually have someone who can protect the rim, who showed that in college, where I just think it's going to be a lot easier for Mark. But yeah, I would definitely say defensively is where I think he's made his mark so far.
SGA, man. Got to talk about SGA. All-star last year. Watched him throughout the entire FIBA tournament. Just the way that he approaches the game. Can't speed him up. The way he changes speeds. His ability to attack the paint and finish so efficiently. I mean, what's next for this guy, man? 31 points per game last year. What's next for SGA?
Yeah, I mean, him making first-team All-NBA, I mean, that changes even a lot of fan perspectives over that last year. Because when he was originally traded from the Clippers, I will admit there's a small minority of Thunder fans who are like, this guy could be like MVP quality. But honestly, it sounded like so homerish at the time. And the big conversation among Thunder fans those first couple of seasons was like, okay, could he be the third best player on a championship team? Could be the second best player on the championship team? And we slowly have gotten like higher and higher until now it feels like, okay, now really the question is like, do you put him in the same tier as like a Devin Booker or a Luka or a Jason Tatum? And I think for that final step, he obviously has to make the playoffs. He has to make the playoffs as the best player on his team. This season is setting up for that, but he still has to go do it. But honestly, everything else he's answered. And I think him making the playoffs this season would be kind of like a natural progression from 2 seasons ago to last season to this season. But yeah, he's incredible. And the thing that excites me is that what we've seen the last 2 seasons is teams just overload on Shea because they don't trust the other players on the team. Like, especially 2 seasons ago, like we just had no shooting. So you would see these like people would take screen grabs during the game where it'd be like, every single player on the other team was in the paint. Shea was somewhere in the middle. And then you'd have these 4 guys spaced who couldn't shoot. Last night, you watching them against the Bucks, Shea didn't have like a great game. I think he was like 4 for 12. He might have had 10 points. But it's so different now because now when they try to overload on Shea, now he's kicking out to Chet in the corner who can shoot it. He's kicking out to Giddey, who's gotten super aggressive at getting to the rim. Or he's kicking out to J-Dub, who's just like a monster now, who can also shoot the 3 or drive. And so I think life is going to be a lot easier for Shea. And we might see a decrease in his points per game, but it won't because he's getting worse. It's just because the team as a whole is getting so much better around him where he doesn't have to do it every single night. He finally has like the help that we've been waiting for.
Well, I mean, even in the play-in, we saw him like hold that team down just like into the waning minutes. I forget who they were playing, but you needed him to go attack the lane and get a bucket. He was doing that. But with your point, like the thing with Shea, even if his shot attempts go down and the volume goes down, as long as he can maintain that efficiency, that's going to be the big thing for taking the Thunder to that next level and going into the playoffs.
Definitely. And part of that, and this is related to Chet and J-Dub as well, is like Chet, J-Dub, and Shea should get to the line 5+ times a night each. Like they are the type of players who can get to the line. Chet, just because he's like so weird, it's very hard for guys to guard him, and he's just been racking up fouls very easily. J-Dub, because he's like so aggressive to get the rim. Honestly, Giddey should, because he drives the rim so much, but he just hasn't gotten calls yet. But if those three guys can get to the line every single night, like this team's going to be very hard to play because they're just going to be so efficient just by racking up free throws. So yeah, it is super exciting right now. I'm trying not to get like too hyped because I know that there's a downside here. Like I know that there's a downside here. The downside is that, yeah, they won 40 games last year, but it was a really weak West. Okay. So maybe they weren't really a 40 win team in a normal season. Maybe they were closer to like a 35 or 36 win team. Yes, you're adding in Chet, and that's super exciting. But how much outside of their starting five, how many of those guys do you actually trust? I mean, there's guys I love, like Aaron Wiggins, like super excited about Usman Jang. Jay Will, I like him. But how many of those guys do I actually trust? It's honestly like Isaiah Joe and Kenrich. Those are the guys where I'm like, yes, they should be in an NBA rotation every single night. No doubt about it. I have no doubts with them. Everyone else on the roster, I'm excited about them, but I also know I'm a fan. So like I'm probably overestimating what all of these guys are going to do this season. Some of these guys are going to fail. We know it. It's impossible for them to all reach their ceiling. So the question is, which and how many of those guys don't live up to expectations? And when they don't, what do we have left? Like, does this team look a lot thinner than it does to fans right now? Because right now we look at this roster and we're like, hey, I'm cool if you're playing the two-way guys, because like Lindy Waters looked great last night. Olivier Sarr looked great last night. At some point, that might be more of an issue. And the question is, does Mark tighten his rotation at that point, or does he continue playing, 15 guys every night?
Should we expect another level up for Jalen Williams, man? J-Dub, I think a lot of people are expecting that. Said to have gotten a lot bigger in the offseason, had an outstanding rookie campaign. I mean, you watch how he operated in his rookie season, 12th pick in the draft by OKC, and you wonder why, 10 other teams passed on him.
Yeah.
What do you think about J-Dub going into his sophomore campaign?
I mean, other than Chet, and Chet's just because like we haven't really seen him yet, but among the other players, like the fan base is very hyped for J-Dub because it started with the like off-season pictures of him just looking like incredibly jacked in a way that he didn't last year. And then you see him he played one summer league game and was just absolutely dominant. And then in these preseason games, you're seeing it too. And not just he's gotten better offensively in terms of using his strength more to get to the rim, but his defense seems to be getting a lot better too. He was one of those guys in his rookie season where he looked the part of a good defender and he had good defensive moments, but I do think he got a little overrated on that end. Last night, you see him having to go up against Giannis because like who else is going to guard him on our team? And like he played well. Now Giannis still had a few plays where he just dunked right over him and just outmuscled him to the rim. But J-Dub, because of his strength, is going to be put in a lot of those matchups. I mean, I was talking to Andrew, like our first TV game, I think it's November 1st, and it's against the Pelicans. Like, he's going to be the main guy guarding Zion. I don't know how well it's going to go, but like he is the guy on our team who is going to take a lot of those matchups. And I think long term, the idea for him is to kind of grow into that player. He's not super tall. He's only like 6'6", but he has a 7'2" wingspan. So he can play up a lot better than someone like Giddey, for instance, who's taller than J-Dub. He's 6'9", but I think he has like a negative wingspan or he's like a 6'8" or 6'9" wingspan. Giddey will eventually play against some bigs too, but I think that's the exciting thing about J-Dub because everyone else talks about how we need bigs, we need more physical players. J-Dub could potentially be that, even though he's not that in the traditional sense. In the same way that Kenrich Williams is kind of that off the bench. Kenrich isn't huge, but him playing small ball 5, like it worked. Like he can just guard bigger guys. He's not bad at it. And so I think they're kind of molding J-Dub into this super Kenrich player.
So with all this said, Alex, what is the expectation for the Thunder this season? Is it be back in the play-in, make the playoffs outright? What's the expectation for this team?
I think most fans would tell you their expectation is top 6. I think anything less than the playoffs will be a disappointment to the fan base. If they miss the play-in, that something bad likely happened, which could happen. I mean, one of these guys could get injured. I think if you're outside the OKC bubble, I think picking them as a play-in team If you want to say they're going to be the 7 or 8 seed, I think that's a reasonable, confident prediction for this team. I don't think you have to go too much higher than that. I've heard some national people picking them as like a home court team. That would be awesome. That would be very cool. We saw that with the first iteration of the Thunder, where they just kept making these huge jumps year after year. Maybe that happens. But for me, I think if they could somehow make it to the 6th seed, that would be best case scenario. If they do anything better than that, that would be incredible. But my highest expectation is 6th seed. I think they could be as low as the 10th seed again. Obviously, one of these good teams is going to fall out.
Yeah,
somebody has to be the 11th seed. I would not pick OKC for that. I think there's other teams in the West that I think are on a little bit more of rocky ground. So I'm pretty confident there'll be a play-in team. 6th seed is probably the ceiling for me that I'm willing to go to.
So you disagree with ESPN's Kevin Pelton saying the Thunder finishing 11th in the West.
Yeah.
Hey, I appreciate it. We need more haters right now because there's too many people that are loving this team. Him and John Hollinger also picked our under. I think he had us as the 10th seed. That's great. I need more of that. I would rather people be saying that than saying, "Oh, this team could be a contender as soon as this year." I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that.
I'm with you, man. I hate when all my teams get hyped because they never seem to live up to those expectations, man. I like to just fly under the radar, expect nothing, and then enjoy the ride. But we'll have to see how Memphis navigates no John Morant for those 25 games. We'll see how they come together after that. Obviously, they have a lot of hype in Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. trying to shoulder that load with that team. Sacramento, you have to expect them to be there again. Mike Brown, Coach of the Year, the way that their offense was so electric in the NBA last year. Obviously, the Suns, you have the Clippers. Will they get Harden? We'll see how they look with those guys. Golden State. I mean, I think Utah should be in that conversation, in that kind of play-in 7 through 10 category with the upgrades they made. You have the Pelicans. We'll see, can Zion stay healthy? What happens with Brandon Ingram? I don't see why OKC can't be in that, again, 7 to 10 range. 6, I think, might be a little high. But you never know. Injuries can happen. Maybe teams don't come together as you thought they would. But I think 7 to 10 is reasonable.
The team I've got my eye on in terms of dropping is Dallas.
That's me too. Yeah.
I like what they did this offseason. But the idea that a team who has high aspirations is going to start 2 rookies and we're all just supposed to be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
I don't get it. Rookies, unless you're really special, it's unlikely that you're going to significantly contribute to winning.
Yeah.
And to start 2 rookies, especially coming off the second half of last season, where Luka and Kyrie were not good together. Their record together was awful.
Yeah.
They were a bottom 5 defense. I look at that roster this year and I'm like, where are they getting so much better defensively? Yes, Grant Williams will help.
Yeah.
I agree. But they added Seth Curry and then they're adding 2 rookies. I get that those rookies are projected to be good defenders eventually, but this isn't especially with Derek Lively, it took him half a season at Duke to start actually looking like a player you would want to take in the lottery.
Yeah.
And we're expecting him to just jump into the NBA day one and be this awesome rim protector like Walker Kessler was. Walker Kessler was so much better in college than Derek Lively was. He was so much more proven when he came into the league. And so they're a team where I think if they get off to a rough start, bad things could happen. I picked Jason Kidd as the first coach to be fired as one of my bold takes, just because I think they're the type of team where if they get off to a rough start, they're going to have to make huge decisions because of Luka. That Luka cloud is going to hang over this entire season unless they are firmly in the playoff conversation.
Luka demanding a trade.
Hey, we'll see.
Yeah, I don't like how they're looking defensively. You're asking a lot, especially from Lively, to kind of be that rim protector for them. They haven't addressed their wing defense, at least on paper, even though, they try to get some guys. As you said, Grant Williams should help. We'll see what Maxence Prosper does with them. But overall, I don't like how they look defensively after trading Finney Smith. You got rid of Bullock. Who else? Dinwiddie, not the best defender, but he was certainly part of that core last year. They're in a real weird area right now, especially hitching their wagon to Kyrie Irving, who, again, I love Kyrie as a player, but fit-wise, I'm not sure how that whole thing works out, man. I like that bold take on Jason Kidd.
Losing DFS, he was, and obviously they probably want Omax to fill that DFS role.
Yeah.
But, man, he was so important to that team. and seeing the drop off from just like having this wing defender that everyone around the league is like, oh yeah, he's good. Like I'd like him on my team. I'd be willing up to maybe give up a protected first for him. It's not like this some amazing player, but I just think he was so important to them. And they're asking a lot of Omax and a lot of Lively to kind of buoy that defense, which as long as Luka and Kyrie are on the court together, likely isn't going to be good. They're really going to have to outscore teams. And they're capable of that. But yeah, I just they're the West team that I just have the most doubts about right now.
But do you know who the biggest loss for the Dallas Mavericks was? Number 11 for the New York Knicks, one Jalen Brunson. It's okay.
Jalen Brunson.
Just got to throw the salt in the wound for the Dallas Mavericks fans because we should have had that pick.
We should have had that pick. And they tanked.
They should always be reminded of that.
Yeah.
Because it was one of the worst moves. Both losing Brunson and not playing out the season and giving you guys what would have been a very fun and nice pick. Was there anyone? I'm kind of interested because they were hovering around 11.
Yeah,
like that whole end of the season. Was there a player you all were looking at? You were like, oh man, if we could just get this guy, he would be a perfect Nick.
Around that 11 spot,
or even like seeing some preseason stuff. Is there a guy that you're like, man, if we had that pick and could have gotten this guy? Do you have regrets yet?
Let me take
even
a
though
look
it was out
at
of your
again.
control.
It's so tough because the Knicks usually we're looking at the draft because the Knicks are like going in the wrong direction because they were going in the right direction. Right. It's kind of tough to say, ooh, and we knew that this pick was going up and down based on how the Mavericks were performing. But
certainly Hendricks. You had Hendricks, you had Walker. Two of the fours. The Knicks are gonna have a hole at the backup four right now.
Yeah, Hendricks would have been nice.
Having just traded Obi Toppin and knowing that Obi had no future with them. I thought those were two guys that you could have taken a look at, man. I mean, look at what Keontae George. Even though the Knicks have a bevy of guards, I mean, Keontae George, outstanding in the summer league. We'll see how he looks with the Utah Jazz, man. But he's a bucket, man, absolute bucket.
There are two guys. One for me was Chris Murray, just because I thought we were going to be lower in the draft because the Mavericks were still in the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
I thought he would have been good just to add defensively for what this team needed. The other guy, Cam Whitmore. I liked what Cam was doing at Nova, and I thought him being out on the wing, that would have been good. His athleticism, he's dynamic, and he fell in the draft, so that's another guy. Those are the two guys I was looking at.
He's one of those guys who are like, even if you didn't see a future for him on your team, like if you're Miami, why do you think a Dame trade would have been easier to make if you had Cam Whitmore as a potential trade chip for Portland? Like, I just don't get why one of those teams didn't just get him purely as an asset, even if you don't believe in him for whatever reason. Like what we saw in Summer League, like he instantly jumped up in people's minds and would have been seen as like an amazing trade asset if, a team like Miami had him.
Yeah, Whitmore is certainly on the list. Obviously, being a Nova guy, you figure that the Knicks had some intel, some insight on him. And again, they need a wing. They need wings, and they needed a backup four. And it's interesting because they've shown the ability to find value deeper in drafts. I believe it was NBA University that had a graphic. This was over the summer that had, I think it was like the top 10 players that were like, it was measuring the amount of money made compared to the wins added. Quickly was number one on the list, and Quentin Grimes was in like that top 10 list in terms of guys on their rookie scale deals, but the amount of impact that they're having on their team in terms of the wins added. And so I think it just points to the Knicks' ability to be able to find guys deeper in the first round, and they have some second round success as well. But last 2 years they punted on the draft. They had Ousmane Deng in the stable and gave him to the OKC Thunder. So.
Oh man, when that tweet came out, because the original tweet was the Knicks select Ousmane Dieng.
We were all confused, by the way. As Knicks fans, we were like, "What selection?
Yeah.
Who?"
Dude, I tweeted, "Thank you so much, Knicks," because I hated him as a prospect in that draft. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just so glad he's off the board because he's an obvious Presti guy."
Yeah,
I know Presti would have taken him if he would have been available. Thank you, Knicks. And then of course it was a trade. So you guys, you need Dallas to be semi-competent so that you can get that pick this year, right?
Yeah. Top 10 protected. Top 10 protected.
Okay.
So we'll see how it goes, man. We'll see how it goes. But Alex, definitely appreciate the time and the insight on the Thunder, man. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And hopefully we'll catch up soon as the season gets underway, man. And we'll come back for an update on the Thunder.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Love being
man.
here.
Just let the people know where they can find you, and if you guys are coming out with any new content coming up, let us know.
Yeah. So we have Down to Dunk 3 days a week. I'm on the Wednesday show. And then me and Andrew, who I do Down to Dunk with, we do a show on the Athletic NBA show called Slam and Jam. That comes out on Fridays. And this week, we're picking our surprise team. Every year, there's at least one team who has an over-under below 36 who wins 10 more games than their over-under.
Wow.
And so, like, just as an example, if you wanted to pick Houston as this team, they would have to win 42 games.
Wow.
So it's a very hard exercise to do because
Yeah.
you have to take a bet on a team that isn't really good. Last year, there were 4 surprise teams.
Wow.
It was like Indy, OKC. So we're picking that team this Friday. So tune in for that.
There we go. We'll be tuned in, man. Great show, everybody at home. Remember that these shows are available in audio podcast format, so no reason to miss it. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great day. CP, Alex, and Alex. We're out of here, man. Peace.